What if the oldest ethics weren't commands, but a dare to think differently about ourselves? Socrates did not write a code. He staged a conversation that unsettled the ground we stand on when we decide what counts as right and good. The result isn't a rulebook, but a method, a process of asking, testing, and correcting our own beliefs about how we should live. In that sense, his influence is less a list of duties and more a map for navigating the moral weather of any era. In the agora and the academy alike, Socrates pressed what we call ethics into a living question. Can we know the good? And if we know it, will we do it? He didn't claim to hand out answers. He handed out questions, sharp enough to cut through the feel-good slogans that accumulate around town squares and university halls. He practiced a form of thinking that looks less like sermon and more like a diagnosis of our own intentions. If our actions reveal what we truly value, then moral life becomes a reflection, not a recital. SFX, chalk_draw. The method he popularized, the Elenchus, is not about winning arguments. It's about exposing inconsistency and forcing the soul to confess what it actually believes when not carried by habit or authority. Picture a puckered cave of hesitation where each assumption about virtue is slid under the light, repolished, and then questioned again. Socrates didn't claim to know the shape of virtue. He insisted that virtue is a kind of knowledge, the knowledge that the good is, in a crucial sense, intelligible and worth choosing. This stance changes the center of gravity in ethics. In many traditions, right and wrong sit as rules above people, instructions imposed from outside. Socrates asks, where do these rules come from for a person who must live with their choices when the crowds grow loud and the evening wears on? If the answer rests on authority alone, it's brittle. If the answer rests on a reason we can defend to our future selves, it becomes resilient enough to travel with us into the fog of temptation and the pressure of family, career, reputation. SFX, breath underscoring, to consider the paradox that emerges when you pursue virtue as knowledge. If you truly know the good, you would do it. If you do not, you have a gap to mend, not a reason to abandon the search. But human life is not a laboratory with perfect conditions. Temptation, fear, inertia, and social habit can override knowledge. Even Socrates invites us to treat the gap between knowing and doing as the very battleground where ethics. He shifts ethics from a set of prescriptions to a discipline of understanding. A lifelong conversation with ourselves about why we do what we do. The elegance of this shift becomes clearer when you glimpse the way ethical thinking travels. Ancient Athens was not a paradise of permission to be virtuous. It was a theater where the idea of virtue itself was contested, redefined, and picked apart in cafes and courts. Socrates makes explicit what earlier thinkers had whispered. Ethics is not a decree that lands upon your head from above. It is a practice you practice, a habit you cultivate, a horizon you extend toward truth with others. SFX, crowd_murmur. 2. And yet there is a humbling limit to this approach. If virtue is knowledge, then ignorance is not just the absence of information. It is the lack of alignment between what you claim to value and what you actually do when pressure rises. Socrates himself was accused of corrupting the young by teaching them to question, to doubt, to think. The charge isn't merely about skepticism. It's about the social cost of a life that doubts received wisdom. In a world that rewards certainty and speed, to insist on coherent inquiry is to risk isolation, misrepresentation, even peril. The lesson here is that ethics is a fragile craft, forged in dialogue under the gaze of colleagues, family, and neighbors who may fear the erosion of comfortable certainties. SFX, heartbeat. The turning point in Socratic thought is not a grand manifesto, but a quiet reorientation. Ethics becomes a practice of care, not coercion, of reason, not obedience, of communal examination, not solitary declaration. The examined life, the phrase that would become a cultural refrain, emerges as a standard of living, rather than a verdict about a single action. It is an invitation to pause, test, and revise, to learn what one's own soul is made of, and to align every choice with something larger than personal advantage. This is where Socrates foreshadows a modern predicament. Our ethical conversations now span biology, technology, market forces, and global institutions. What counts as the good when we cannot fully know the consequences of our actions? What if the most pressing ethical questions are not about whether to tell a lie in a moment of fear, but about whether the institutions we depend on nurture virtue, restraint, and accountability? Socrates teaches us that the path to a good life is not a solitary ascent, but a shared pursuit that invites doubt, transparency, and revision. SFX, soft_wind, to the twist, then, is not that Socrates gave us a rule to follow, but that he shows us how to live with a question. In his world, moral clarity is not a badge earned by cleverness. It is a habit formed through conversations that refuse to settle for easy answers. The ethical landscape becomes a kind of common laboratory in which citizens, not priests or rulers alone, test the propositions that frame their lives. This democratization of ethical inquiry is perhaps his most radical legacy. Ethics as something you test with your peers in public over time, with the courage to admit what you don't know. If we absorb that, we see why his influence endures across centuries and cultures. He reframes virtue as the capacity to deliberate well when it matters most, not as a destination navigated by inherited rules. He asks us to own our beliefs about right and wrong, to defend them with reasons that could persuade a reasonable opponent, and to adjust them when the reasons change. The result is not moral rigidity, but moral resilience, a way of living that remains teachable, corrigible, and alive. SFX, philosophical_chime. One, the resolution is not a single verdict on what counts as good. It is a renewed invitation to live with questions that outlive us, to see thorny problems as opportunities to practice virtue, and to treat other minds as colleagues in the ethical project rather than obstacles to be overcome. Socrates does not provide a polished blueprint for every situation. He offers a method for approaching each situation with humility, curiosity, and courage. So when you face a choice today, remember his way of thinking. Articulate what you think the good would require. Examine the motives behind your desire. Test your conclusion against the possibility that you might be wrong, and invite others to weigh in. The goal is not triumph over others, but alignment within yourself. A life where your beliefs and your actions travel the same road. SFX, _slow. 2, the simplest takeaway is perhaps the most demanding. Ethics as a practice of conversation with the self and the world. The aim is not certainty, but integrity, the stubborn willingness to revise in light of better reasons, and to act in a way that makes the best version of yourself. If Socrates could pose a question for every habit, then your day is a field where questions bloom into choices. The ethical life, in his sense, is a craft you refine through disagreement, reflection, and steady attention to what your future self would wish you had done differently. In that light, morality becomes less about winning battles of belief and more about continuing the conversation. That keeps your character awake. Socrates shows us that to change our understanding of ethics is not to abolish rules, but to restore responsibility. Responsibility to reason and to the deeper part of ourselves that wants to be good. So take a breath and ask yourself, what question about the good will I choose to carry today? Even if the answer unsettles me, the road may be long, but the path is clear enough to walk with purpose, one question at a time. That invitation to inquiry becomes a patient practice in daily life. When noise clashes with certainty, a Socratic habit, what do you mean by good, offers a calmer axis. You notice how often people mistake feeling for knowing, habit for reason, novelty for truth. The effect isn't instant shock, but steady stamina. The ability to linger with a question until the fog loosens. In ethics today, this translates into demanding clarity from our institutions and from ourselves, with enough humility to revise. In disagreement, this habit cools heat and invites the other to sharpen your own view. The core is dialogue, not doctrine. That shift makes ethics portable across time and culture.